The sound of his keys hitting the marble countertop still echoes in my mind, that sharp, metallic clink that punctuated the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the real beginning, with the phone call that shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where betrayal feels impossible, where trust still means something, comment below and tell me where that magical place is, because I need to believe it exists. My name is Rebecca, and for 8 years, I believed I was living the American dream. Picture-perfect house in Westchester County, New York, with the white picket fence and everything. My husband Marcus worked in commercial real estate development, traveling constantly for deals that would, according to him, set us up for life. I was a freelance graphic designer, working from our home office that overlooked the garden I'd spent 3 years perfecting. We had plans, big plans. Kids, a vacation home in the Hamptons, early retirement. All built on what I now know was the most elaborate deception I've ever encountered. Marcus had this way about him that made you believe every word he said. Tall, broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished rather than aging. He spoke with this quiet confidence that drew people in, made them want to trust him. Made me want to trust him. His laugh could fill a room, and when he looked at you, really looked at you, it felt like you were the only person in the world who mattered. But that Tuesday in September, when my phone rang at 7:43 p.m., I discovered that everything, the laugh, the looks, the promises, was performance art mastered by a man who viewed deception as a professional skill. The caller ID showed Jenna Mobile. My sister, 3 years older than me, had been flying commercial airlines for 12 years. She'd worked her way up from regional carriers to Delta, and I was so proud of her. Jenna had always been the adventurous one, the one who took risks while I played it safe. She was based out of Atlanta but flew routes all over the country, living the kind of independent life I sometimes envied during those long days alone in my perfect house. "Hey, Jen," I answered, cradling the phone against my shoulder while I folded Marcus's shirts he'd worn on business trips that I now realize were anything but business. "How's the friendly skies treating you today?" The silence on the other end should have been my first warning. Jenna was never silent. She was the kind of person who started talking the moment you picked up, launching into stories about difficult passengers or crazy weather delays or the pilot she was secretly dating but couldn't tell our parents about. "Rebecca." Her voice sounded strange, strained. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." I paused mid-fold, holding one of Marcus's navy blue dress shirts against my chest. Something in her tone made my skin prickle with unease. "Okay. What's going on? Where is Marcus right now?" The question was so unexpected, so random, that I actually laughed. What kind of question is that? "He's here. He's been home all day, actually. First time in weeks he hasn't had some meeting or site visit. He's in the living room watching that documentary about the Chicago architecture he loves so much." I could hear noise in the background of Jenna's call, the distinctive sounds of an airport terminal. Announcements echoing over intercoms, the rumble of wheeled luggage, the general chaos that surrounded air travel. "Rebecca, listen to me very carefully. I need you to physically look at Marcus right now. Can you see him?" "Jenna, what the hell is going on? You're scaring me. Please, just look." I set down the shirt and walked from our bedroom toward the living room, phone pressed to my ear. I could hear the television, David Attenborough's distinctive voice narrating something about urban planning and steel beam construction. The sound was coming from Marcus's usual spot on the sectional sofa, his back to me. "I can see him," I said, relief flooding my voice. "He's exactly where I said he was." "Jen, seriously, what's this about?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Jenna spoke, and her words came out in a whisper so quiet I had to strain to hear them. "That can't be true, Rebecca. Because I'm looking at Marcus right now. He just boarded my flight to Ohio with another woman, and they're sitting in business class seats 3A and 3B. The world tilted sideways. My vision blurred at the edges, and I felt like I was falling even though I was standing perfectly still. "What did you say?" I'm working the Delta flight from LaGuardia to Columbus. Flight 2847. Your husband, at least, a man who looks exactly like your husband, just walked onto my plane 15 minutes ago with a blonde woman in her 30s. She's wearing a diamond ring the size of a small planet, and they're acting like they're together, Rebecca. Really together. My legs went weak. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself, staring at the back of the man on my couch. The man who was supposedly my husband. The man who was supposedly watching television while simultaneously boarding a plane 3 hours away. That's impossible, I whispered. You're wrong. It has to be someone who looks like him. Rebecca, I've known Marcus for 8 years. I was at your wedding. I've had Christmas dinner with this man dozens of times. I know what he looks like, and I know what he sounds like. I heard him laugh at something she said while they were settling into their seats. It's his laugh, Becca. You know the one. I did know the one. That rich, warm laugh that had first attracted me to him at a coffee shop in Manhattan 9 years ago. The laugh that had convinced me he was genuine, trustworthy, worth building a life with. But he's here, I said, my voice cracking. I can see him. Then walk over there. Right now. Walk over and look at his face. My feet felt like they were encased in concrete, but I forced myself to move. Step by step across the hardwood floors I'd insisted on when we renovated 3 years ago. Past the family photos lining the hallway, our wedding day, vacations to Martha's Vineyard, last Christmas morning with our matching pajamas and forced smiles. I reached the living room and stopped behind the sectional sofa. The television was on, just as I'd said. But now, standing directly behind the couch, I could see something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The room was empty. The television was on. A throw blanket was arranged on the cushions as if someone had been sitting there. A half-empty coffee mug sat on the side table, still warm. But there was no one there. Rebecca. Jenna's voice seemed to come from very far away. What do you see? My hand started shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. He's not here. What? The living room is empty, Jenna. But the TV is on, and his coffee cup is here, and it's like he just vanished. Just then, as if summoned by the pure impossibility of the situation, I heard the front door open. The sound of keys hitting the marble countertop. Footsteps in the entryway. Becca, I'm home. Marcus's voice called out, warm and familiar and completely, utterly wrong. I stood frozen in the living room, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the empty couch where I'd thought my husband had been sitting for the past hour. The man I'd just heard calling my name was walking through our front door while my sister watched him board a plane to Ohio with another woman. Rebecca, Jenna's voice was urgent now. The plane is about to push back from the gate. I have to hang up in 30 seconds. But I need you to listen to me. Whatever is happening there, whatever you think you're seeing, the man I'm looking at right now is your husband. I'm absolutely certain. Footsteps approached the living room. In seconds, Marcus would round the corner and see me standing there, and I would have to look at his face while knowing what I now knew, while trying to understand how he could be in 2 places at once. I have to go, I whispered to Jenna. Be careful. And Rebecca, if you've been through something like this, if you've ever had your reality torn apart by someone you trusted completely, please hit that subscribe button below. Share this story if it resonates with you. Because what happened next, what I discovered about the man I'd married, it's something every woman needs to know is possible. Becca. Marcus appeared in the living room doorway, and he looked exactly like he always did. Tired from work, loosening his tie, that familiar smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I stared at him, this man who was supposedly in 2 places at once, and realized that in a way, I had seen a ghost. The ghost of my old life, where things made sense and trust wasn't a luxury I couldn't afford. I'm fine, I lied, ending the call with Jenna and slipping my phone into my pocket. Just tired. But I wasn't fine. I was standing at the edge of a precipice I hadn't even known existed, about to discover that the life I'd been living was constructed entirely of smoke and mirrors, maintained by a man whose capacity for deception would make professional con artists weep with envy. And the worst part? This was just the beginning. Approx 1,650 words. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Marcus was already gone, or at least, I assumed he was gone. After what happened the night before, I wasn't sure I could trust my own perception of reality anymore. The space next to me in bed was cold, the sheets barely wrinkled, as if he'd never been there at all. I found a note on the kitchen counter written in his familiar handwriting, "Early meeting in the city. Back tonight. Love you." The same type of note he'd left hundreds of times before, but now it felt like evidence of something sinister rather than a sweet gesture from a busy husband. My hands shook as I made coffee, replaying Jenna's call over and over in my mind. She'd been absolutely certain it was Marcus on that plane. My sister wasn't the type to make mistakes about something that important, and she'd known Marcus almost as long as I had. But he'd been here. I'd heard him come home, seen him walk into the living room, had a completely normal conversation with him about his day. At least, I thought I had. The more I replayed the previous evening, the more details seemed to shift and blur in my memory. Had I actually seen Marcus's face when he came home? I remembered his voice, the sound of his keys, his footsteps. But his actual face, when I tried to picture it, the image felt strangely elusive. I called Jenna at 9 a.m., knowing she'd be awake despite the late flight. Pilots have weird schedules, but she was always an early riser. "How are you holding up?" she asked before I could even say hello. "I don't know." "Jen, are you absolutely sure it was him?" "Rebecca, I took a picture." My coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered against the kitchen tiles, sending hot liquid and ceramic shards across the floor I'd mopped just yesterday. "You what?" I was so shocked when I saw him that I grabbed my phone and took a picture before I could think about whether it was appropriate or professional. I know it sounds crazy, but I knew you wouldn't believe me without proof. "Send it to me. Right now." "Are you sure you want to see this?" I was already on my hands and knees, cleaning up the broken mug, but I stopped moving entirely. "Send it, Jenna." My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. I opened the message with hands that felt disconnected from my body, like I was watching someone else's fingers tap the screen. The image was slightly blurry, taken quickly and from a distance, but there was no mistaking what I was seeing. Marcus, unmistakably Marcus, sitting in a business-class seat next to a woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and perfect makeup. She was leaning into him, her hand resting on his arm, and he was smiling down at her with the same expression he'd worn on our honeymoon when he looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. But it was more than just the physical proof that made my world collapse. It was the details. Marcus was wearing the charcoal grey suit I'd bought him for our anniversary last year. The one he claimed was too expensive to wear for everyday business meetings, reserved only for special occasions. His hair was styled the way it looked when he was trying to impress someone important. And around his ring finger, where his wedding band should have been, there was nothing but a pale line of skin. "Rebecca, are you there?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The woman in the photo was stunning in that polished, expensive way that spoke of personal trainers and professional stylists and a life funded by someone else's hard work. She looked like the kind of woman Marcus would have dated before he met me, before he settled for the safe choice, the woman who would support his dreams and ask for nothing in return except fidelity and honesty. Two things he'd apparently never intended to provide. When was this taken? I finally managed to whisper. Yesterday, around 8 p.m. The flight was delayed about 20 minutes because of weather in Ohio, which is actually how I had time to call you. If we'd left on schedule, I would have just seen him and wondered if I should mention it later. I looked at the timestamp on the photo. 8:17 p.m. At 8:17 p.m. yesterday, I had been standing in my living room, convinced my husband was sitting on our couch watching television. The same husband who was simultaneously boarding a plane to Ohio with another woman. "Jenna, I need you to tell me everything. Every detail you remember." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sounds of her apartment in Atlanta, the coffee maker she'd inherited from our grandmother, the morning news playing softly in the background. They were already seated when I boarded. The woman was in the window seat, and Marcus was in the aisle. They had champagne, which passengers don't usually order before takeoff unless they're celebrating something. She was wearing this massive diamond ring, but not on her ring finger. On her right hand. Describe the ring. Emerald cut, probably 3 carats, surrounded by smaller diamonds. The kind of ring that costs more than most people's cars. I closed my eyes and tried to remember if I'd ever seen Marcus with that kind of money. Our finances were comfortable but not extravagant. We had a joint checking account, joint savings, joint credit cards. I handled most of our bills and budget planning because Marcus claimed to be hopeless with money management. If he'd purchased a ring like that, where would the money have come from? What else? They were intimate. Not inappropriately so, but like people who are very comfortable with each other. She kept touching his arm when she talked, and he was playing with her hair. At one point, she pulled out her phone and showed him something that made him laugh. That laugh, Rebecca. The one that sounds like he's genuinely delighted by whatever he's hearing. I knew exactly the laugh she meant. It was the same laugh I'd fallen in love with, the same laugh I'd thought was reserved for me. Did you hear them say anything? Not much. They were speaking quietly, and I was trying not to be obvious about watching them. But I did hear her call him something that wasn't Marcus. My heart stopped. What did she call him? It sounded like David or Daniel. I couldn't be sure, but it definitely wasn't Marcus. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the kitchen floor next to the broken coffee mug. I stared down at it, watching Jenna's name flash on the screen as she tried to call me back, but I couldn't move to answer it. I couldn't do anything except sit in the wreckage of my kitchen and try to process what I'd just learned. My husband of 8 years had been living a double life. He had another woman, possibly another name, possibly another entire existence I knew nothing about. The man who shared my bed, my dreams, my most intimate secrets was a complete stranger. But even as that terrible truth settled into my bones, a part of my mind was still trying to rationalize what had happened the night before. I'd heard Marcus come home. I'd heard his voice, his footsteps, the familiar sound of his keys hitting the counter. Either I was losing my mind, or something even more sinister was happening. I picked up the phone and called Jenna back. Rebecca, thank God. I thought you'd hung up on me. Jen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. Okay. What time did that flight land in Columbus? I heard her shuffle papers in the background. We touched down at 10:47 p.m. local time. With the time difference, that would have been 11:47 p.m. your time. And how long would it take to get from the Columbus airport to, say, a hotel downtown? Maybe 45 minutes if there's no traffic. Why? I closed my eyes and did the math. If Marcus had landed in Columbus at 11:47 p.m. and needed 45 minutes to get anywhere, he wouldn't have arrived at his destination until well after midnight. But I had a very clear memory of him being in our bedroom at 11 p.m., brushing his teeth and complaining about how tired he was from his long day of meetings. Rebecca, what aren't you telling me? I think. I stopped, unsure how to voice what I was thinking without sounding completely insane. I think the Marcus who came home last night wasn't the real Marcus. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long that I wondered if Jenna had hung up on me this time. What do you mean? I mean I think someone else came into my house last night, pretending to be my husband. Someone who knew enough about our routines and our life to fool me in the dark, someone who could mimic his voice and his mannerisms well enough to pass for him. That's... Jenna's voice trailed off. That's impossible, isn't it? I don't know anymore. But Jen, if you've ever questioned your own sanity because someone you trusted turned out to be living a lie, if you've ever had that moment where you realized you didn't know the person sleeping next to you at all, please take a second to like this video. Because what I discovered next made me realize that everything I thought I knew about deception was just the tip of the iceberg. I hung up the phone and looked around my perfect kitchen in my perfect house, the one I'd worked so hard to make into a home. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but now it all felt like a stage set, beautiful and convincing from a distance, but hollow and fake when you looked too closely. And somewhere in Ohio, the man I'd married was waking up next to another woman, probably getting ready for another day of pretending to be someone else. The question was, if he was there, then who had been here? I spent the rest of that morning turning into someone I never thought I'd become, a detective in my own life, searching for evidence of deception in every corner of the home I believed was built on love and trust. The transformation was both necessary and heartbreaking, like watching your own innocence die in real time. First, I went through Marcus's home office with the methodical precision of a forensic investigator. He'd always been protective of this space, claiming he needed privacy for confidential business deals, but I'd never questioned it. Why would I? I trusted him completely, and trust, I was learning, makes you blind to even the most obvious red flags. His desk drawers were locked, which should have been my first clue years ago. What married couple locks desk drawers from each other? But Marcus had explained it away easily. Client confidentiality, sensitive documents, legal requirements for his real estate work. I'd accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it, because doubt would have required me to confront the possibility that my perfect life was built on quicksand. I found the spare key in his toolbox in the garage, hidden inside an old coffee can behind rusty screwdrivers and forgotten drill bits. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock, but when the drawer finally opened, what I found made my blood run cold. Credit card statements. Dozens of them, for accounts I'd never heard of, all in Marcus's name but sent to a P.O. box in Manhattan. The charges read like a catalogue of infidelity, expensive restaurants I'd never been to, luxury hotels during dates that coincided with his supposed business trips, jewelry stores, lingerie boutiques, florists. Thousands of dollars spent on a life I had no part in, funded by money I didn't know existed. But it was the receipts that truly broke my heart. Printed confirmations for romantic weekend getaways, couple spa treatments, tickets to Broadway shows, all the things Marcus claimed we couldn't afford, all the experiences I'd dreamed of sharing with him, purchased for someone else. Someone whose name appeared over and over again on dinner reservations and hotel bookings, David and Charlotte Mitchell. David. The name Jenna had heard the woman call him on the plane. I sat in Marcus's office chair, the expensive ergonomic one he'd insisted was necessary for his back problems, and stared at evidence of a parallel life so elaborate and complete that I couldn't understand how he'd managed to maintain both versions of himself. The David Mitchell who lived in Manhattan and took Charlotte to five-star restaurants was wealthy, spontaneous, romantic. The Marcus who lived with me in Westchester was careful with money, predictable, practical. Which version was real? Or were they both equally false? Different masks worn by a man whose true self was something I might never understand? My phone rang, jarring me out of my spiral of discovery. The caller ID showed Marcus's office number. Hello. I answered, trying to sound normal despite the chaos of evidence spread across the desk in front of me. Mrs. Patterson? This is Jennifer from Hartwell Commercial Properties. I'm calling to confirm Mr. Patterson's client meeting at 3 p.m. today. The location has been changed to our downtown office instead of the Brooklyn site visit. I stared at one of the credit card statements, dated from last week, showing a charge at a Manhattan hotel during the exact time Marcus had claimed to be at a Brooklyn construction site. Actually, I said, improvising, I think there might be some confusion about Marcus's schedule today. Could you tell me what project this meeting is regarding? The Riverside Development Project, of course. Mr. Patterson has been our lead consultant on that deal for the past 6 months. I grabbed a pen and wrote down Riverside Development on a piece of paper. Right, of course. And remind me, what's the client company again? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm not sure I should be discussing confidential client information with you. Oh, I'm sorry. I handle Marcus's calendar sometimes, and I just wanted to make sure I had the right information. You know how it is. Well, I suppose it's not exactly confidential. The client is Meridian Holdings. They're developing luxury condominiums along the East River. Thank you so much. I'll make sure Marcus knows about the location change. I hung up and immediately opened my laptop, Googling Riverside Development Meridian Holdings. What I found made my stomach drop even further. The Riverside Development project had been completed and opened 18 months ago. The luxury condominiums were already occupied, the construction finished, the development deal closed. If the project was completed over a year ago, what had Marcus been doing during all those site visits and client meetings over the past 6 months? I called Hartwell Commercial Properties back, this time asking to speak with Marcus directly. I'm sorry, the same woman told me, but Mr. Patterson isn't in the office today. Actually, he's been working remotely for several months now. We rarely see him in person anymore. Working remotely. Which meant all those times he'd left the house in a suit, claiming to be heading to the office, he'd been going somewhere else entirely. Someone else entirely. The web of lies was so intricate, so carefully constructed, that I felt a twisted sort of admiration for the planning it must have required. Marcus, or David, or whoever he really was, had created 2 completely separate existences, complete with different addresses, different jobs, different personalities. He was living a double life so elaborate that it required the organizational skills of a CEO and the acting abilities of a Broadway performer. But there was still the question of who had been in my house the night before. If Marcus was in Ohio with Charlotte, then who had I talked to? Who had made those familiar sounds, used that familiar voice, responded to my questions with perfect knowledge of our shared history? I was still puzzling over that impossibility when my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the 79th Street entrance, at 2 p.m. Come alone. A friend. Every instinct I had screamed danger, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Someone knew something about what was happening to me, and I needed answers more than I needed safety. I grabbed my keys and headed for Manhattan, driving through the city with my mind racing faster than the traffic around me. The Riverside Park mentioned in the text was directly across from the luxury condominiums in the development project Marcus had supposedly been working on. That couldn't be a coincidence. I arrived at the park 20 minutes early and waited on a bench overlooking the Hudson River, watching joggers and dog walkers go about their normal lives while my own existence continued to crumble. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman approached me, tall, brunette, wearing designer sunglasses and the kind of clothes that suggested serious money. Rebecca Patterson, she asked, sitting down next to me without waiting for an invitation. Yes. Who are you? She pulled off her sunglasses, and I found myself looking into eyes that held the same hollow expression I'd been seeing in mirrors lately, the look of someone whose trust had been systematically destroyed by a master manipulator. My name is Lisa Chen, she said. And I think we have a mutual problem. What kind of problem? She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo that made my world tilt sideways again. It was Marcus, but not with the blonde woman from Jenna's picture. This time, he was with Lisa, and they were clearly together in the same intimate way I'd seen him with Charlotte. Same expression, same body language, same devastating smile. Your husband, Lisa said, is also my husband. Legally married to both of us, living separate lives with each of us, and neither of us had any idea the other existed until yesterday. I stared at her, then at the photo, then back at her face. That's impossible. I thought so too. But then I started digging into the man I knew as Daniel Chen. Yes, he took my last name when we got married 2 years ago, and I discovered that Daniel Chen doesn't exist. The social security number is fake, the background is fabricated, and the only thing that's real is his talent for becoming whoever his current target needs him to be. Current target. That's what we are, Rebecca. Targets. Marks in some kind of elaborate long-term con that I don't fully understand yet. But I know one thing for certain, the man we both married, the man we both trusted with our hearts and our homes and our futures, is a professional criminal. She handed me a manila folder filled with documents, marriage certificates, financial records, property deeds, all bearing different versions of the man I knew as Marcus. There are at least 4 of us that I've found so far, Lisa continued. 4 women who think they're married to the same man, all living in different cities, all funding different aspects of his operation. And Rebecca. I don't think he's done collecting wives. I opened the folder and saw my own marriage certificate, but next to it was an identical document showing Lisa's marriage to Daniel Chen just 6 months after Marcus and I had gotten married. Below that was another certificate for someone named Michelle Rodriguez, married to Michael Rodriguez in Phoenix, Arizona. How is this legal? I whispered. It's not. None of these marriages are legally valid except possibly the first one, and we don't even know which one that was. But legality doesn't matter when you're dealing with someone who spent years perfecting the art of deception. I thought about the credit card statements, the fake business meetings, the impossible logistics of maintaining multiple lives across multiple states. How does he manage all this? How does he keep track of who he's supposed to be with each of us? Lisa's smile was bitter. Very carefully. And with help. Help. Rebecca, what did the Marcus who came to your house last night look like? The question hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean, did you actually see his face? Or did you just hear his voice, see his silhouette, recognize his mannerisms? I tried to remember, tried to picture the man who'd walked into my living room 12 hours after Jenna had watched Marcus board a plane to Ohio. The more I concentrated, the more I realized that my memory was built entirely on assumptions and familiar sounds rather than actual visual confirmation. I don't think I ever looked directly at him. That's because it wasn't him. And if you're feeling the same terror I felt when I realized how deep this goes, if you're starting to understand that everything you thought you knew about your life was carefully orchestrated fiction, please share this video with anyone who might be going through something similar. Because what Lisa told me next made me realize that my husband wasn't just a bigamist or a con artist. He was something much more dangerous, and I was in much more trouble than I'd ever imagined. Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out another photo, this one showing a man who looked exactly like Marcus but younger, with different colored hair and wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Meet Marcus's twin brother, she said. His name is Matthew, and has been covering for Marcus whenever our husband needs to be in 2 places at once. The revelation that Marcus had a twin brother felt like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. Suddenly, everything that had seemed impossible started to make terrifying sense. The man who'd come home to me while Marcus was on a plane to Ohio. The way my husband could seem like 2 different people depending on his mood. The inconsistencies in his stories that I'd chalked up to stress or fatigue. Matthew Patterson, Lisa said, pointing to the photo. Identical twin, though he usually changes his appearance slightly, different hair color, facial hair, clothing style. They've been running this operation together for at least 5 years that I can trace. I stared at the image of the man who looked like my husband but wasn't. The bone structure was identical, but there were subtle differences that would only be noticeable if you were looking for them. A slightly different way of holding his mouth, a different expression in the eyes. Details that would be invisible to a wife seeing her husband in dim lighting after 8 years of marriage. So when Marcus needs to be in 2 places at once, Matthew steps in. He's studied you, Rebecca. Studied your routines, your conversations, your relationship patterns. He knows enough about your life to fool you in short interactions, especially when you're not expecting deception. The violation felt deeper than anything I'd experienced so far. It wasn't just that my husband had been lying to me, it was that a complete stranger had been in my home, in my bedroom, pretending to be the man I loved. How many times had I kissed Matthew thinking he was Marcus? How many intimate conversations had I had with the wrong person? How do you know all this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa's expression hardened. Because I caught them switching places. 3 weeks ago, I came home early from a business trip and saw 2 men who looked exactly like my husband standing in my kitchen, going over what looked like schedules and notes. They were so focused on their planning that they didn't hear me come in. What did you do? I hid and listened. They were coordinating their calendars, making sure they knew which one of them was supposed to be with which wife on which days. They had code names for all of us. You're Westchester. I'm Manhattan. Michelle in Phoenix is desert. And there's apparently a fourth woman they call Lakefront who lives somewhere in Chicago. The clinical efficiency of it made me feel sick. We weren't people to them. We were territories to be managed, assets to be maintained, marks to be milked for whatever value they could provide. What kind of value? I asked. Lisa opened her purse and pulled out a stack of financial documents. Money, obviously. But it's more sophisticated than just stealing from joint accounts. They're using our credit ratings, our property, our professional networks. Your husband, the real Marcus, has been using your design business connections to launder money through fake consulting contracts. My husband has been using my import business to smuggle things I don't even want to think about. We're not just wives, Rebecca. We're unwilling partners in a criminal enterprise. I thought about all the times Marcus had suggested I take on certain clients, had recommended my services to people he'd met through his real estate work. Projects that had paid unusually well for minimal work, clients who'd been oddly unconcerned with creative details and timelines. I thought I was just getting lucky with easy, high-paying gigs. How long have you been investigating this? Since I saw them together. I hired a private investigator, did my own research, started reaching out to other women I suspected might be involved. That's how I found you, through property records and social media cross-references. When I saw that photo your sister posted on Instagram from Christmas last year, the one with you and Marcus in matching sweaters, I knew I'd found another victim. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of Jenna's Instagram post. There we were, Marcus and I, looking like the perfect couple in our ridiculous Christmas pajamas, completely oblivious to the fact that our entire relationship was built on lies. Your sister's call yesterday wasn't a coincidence, Lisa continued. I'd been tracking Marcus's travel patterns, and when I saw he was scheduled to be on that Delta flight to Ohio, I knew it was the perfect opportunity to prove what I suspected about the twin situation. I called in a favor with someone I know who works for the airline and had them alert any crew members to watch for Marcus and report back. You orchestrated that. I needed confirmation that you existed and that you were being deceived the same way I was. When your sister called you while Marcus was on the plane, it proved that Matthew was covering for him at your house. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Not only had my husband been deceiving me for years, but now other people were orchestrating events in my life to uncover the deception. I felt like a character in someone else's story, with no agency over my own narrative. What do you want from me? I asked. Lisa's eyes hardened with a determination I recognized, the look of someone who'd been pushed too far and was ready to push back. I want revenge. Not just the satisfaction of exposing them, but real, devastating consequences for what they've done to us. And I want every penny they've stolen from us, plus interest. She opened the manila folder again and pulled out what looked like architectural blueprints. This is the Riverside development project that your fake husband claims to still be working on. It was completed over a year ago, but here's what you don't know. Marcus and Matthew purchased 3 of the luxury condominiums using money they embezzled from our accounts and fake consulting fees. They're worth about $2.3 million each, and they're planning to sell them and disappear with the profits. I stared at the blueprints, seeing dollar amounts that represented years of my work, my savings, my financial security. Money I'd trusted Marcus to invest wisely for our future had been stolen and used to fund his criminal operation. How do we stop them? We don't just stop them, Lisa said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than shouting. We destroy them. But it requires all of us working together, you, me, Michelle in Phoenix, and whoever this fourth woman in Chicago is. You've contacted Michelle. Yesterday. She's flying in tomorrow morning. Turns out her husband Michael has been using her restaurant business to launder drug money, and she's been unknowingly serving as a front for a distribution network that spans 3 states. She's even angrier than we are, if that's possible. The scope of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just bigamy or fraud, it was a sophisticated criminal enterprise using multiple identities, multiple wives, and multiple legitimate businesses as cover. Marcus and Matthew weren't just con artists, they were criminal masterminds operating at a level I'd never imagined possible. What's the plan? Lisa smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, the expression reached her eyes. We're going to use their own methods against them. Deception, manipulation, careful planning, and the element of surprise. But first, we need to understand exactly how deep this goes. She handed me a piece of paper with an address written on it. Tomorrow night, Marcus is supposed to be at a business dinner that will keep him out until late. According to the schedule I overheard, Matthew will be covering for him at your house. I want you to act completely normal, go through your regular evening routine, and keep Matthew distracted while I search the Manhattan apartment where Marcus takes his other women. What if Matthew realizes I know? He won't, as long as you don't give him reason to suspect. Remember, he's been fooling you for years. He's overconfident, and overconfidence makes people sloppy. I thought about all the evenings I'd spent with someone I'd thought was my husband, never questioning the subtle differences in behavior or conversation that now seemed obvious in hindsight. How many times had I been talking to Matthew instead of Marcus without knowing it? What are we looking for in the apartment? Financial records, client lists, evidence of other victims, anything that can help us understand the full scope of their operation. But most importantly, I want to find out who's funding this. An operation this sophisticated requires serious backing, and I don't think Marcus and Matthew are the masterminds. I think they're working for someone else. The possibility that my husband was part of an even larger criminal organization made my blood run cold. If Lisa was right, we weren't just dealing with two con artists, we were up against a network of professionals who'd made careers out of destroying lives. Lisa, I said, looking out over the Hudson River where people were going about their normal days, oblivious to the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of ordinary life, what if we're in over our heads? What if these people are more dangerous than we realize? She followed my gaze to the water, quiet for a long moment. Then we better be smarter than they are, she said finally. Because Rebecca, I've lost everything. My business, my savings, my ability to trust another human being. They've stolen my identity, my security, and 3 years of my life. I have nothing left to lose. She turned to look at me, and I saw my own desperation reflected in her eyes. The question is, what do you have left to lose? I thought about my perfect house, my comfortable life, my belief that I knew the man I'd married. All of it was already gone, destroyed the moment Jenna called me with that impossible photograph. What remained was just the illusion of normalcy, a stage set waiting to be torn down. Nothing, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I have nothing left to lose. Then we understand each other perfectly. Lisa stood up and put her sunglasses back on, transforming back into the polished, professional woman who'd approached me an hour earlier. But now I could see the steel beneath the surface, the strength that comes from surviving betrayal and choosing to fight back rather than simply survive. One more thing, she said, pausing as she prepared to leave. If anyone watching this has ever felt like their entire life was built on lies, if you've ever discovered that someone you loved was literally a different person than you thought they were, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because what we're about to do, what we discovered about the scope of this deception, it's going to change everything. She walked away, leaving me alone on the bench with a folder full of evidence and a plan that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time since Jenna's call, I felt like I had some control over my situation. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Tomorrow night, I would sit across from a man who looked like my husband, act like everything was normal, and help orchestrate the beginning of the most sophisticated revenge plot I'd ever imagined. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to become exactly the kind of deceiver that Marcus and Matthew were, using their own tactics to destroy them. The difference was, they had chosen to be criminals. I was just choosing to survive. The next evening, I found myself preparing for the performance of my lifetime. I'd spent the entire day rehearsing normalcy, practicing casual conversation topics, reviewing the routine details of our life that Matthew would expect me to know, even choosing the outfit that the real Marcus would find most attractive. Every detail had to be perfect because one wrong move could expose our entire plan. At 6:47 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of keys in the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs as footsteps approached the kitchen where I was making dinner. Marcus's favorite pasta dish, prepared exactly the way he liked it. I forced myself to breathe steadily and arrange my face into the expression of mild domestic contentment that had characterized most of our evenings together for the past 8 years. "Smells amazing in here," said the man who walked into my kitchen, and for a moment, the voice was so perfectly Marcus that I almost forgot this was an imposter. I turned around with what I hoped looked like a natural smile. "How was your day?" Looking at Matthew's face while knowing he wasn't Marcus was surreal. Every feature was identical. The slight scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way his hair curled just slightly at the nape of his neck, even the tiny mole on his cheek that I'd kissed thousands of times. But now that I knew what to look for, I could see the differences. His posture was slightly more rigid than Marcus's usual relaxed slouch. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes the way Marcus's did. Small details that would be invisible to someone who wasn't specifically watching for deception. "Long day," Matthew replied, loosening his tie in a gesture that was perfectly Marcus but felt like a performance. "The Henderson deal is getting complicated. Might have to fly out to Cleveland next week to sort it out in person." I nodded and stirred the sauce, noting how he'd mentioned Cleveland rather than any of the cities where Marcus's other wives lived. Either he was being deliberately vague or there was yet another aspect of their operation I didn't know about. "That's too bad. I was hoping we could finally take that weekend trip to the Berkshires we've been talking about." Matthew paused, and I caught a flash of uncertainty in his expression before he recovered. The real Marcus and I had never discussed a trip to the Berkshires. I'd made it up to test whether Matthew had access to detailed knowledge of our conversations. "Right, the Berkshires," he said after a beat too long. "Maybe the following weekend." One point confirmed. Matthew's knowledge of my relationship with Marcus wasn't complete. He could handle general conversation and routine interactions, but specific details would trip him up if I was careful. I served dinner and sat across from him at the table where I'd shared thousands of meals with the real Marcus, watching this stranger cut his food with the same precise movements, hold his fork the same way, even chew with the same rhythm. The level of observation and practice required to mimic someone so perfectly was both impressive and deeply disturbing. "Rebecca," Matthew said after a few minutes of casual conversation, "I've been thinking we should refinance the house. Interest rates are favorable right now, and we could probably free up some cash for renovations." I kept my expression neutral, but internally, alarm bells were screaming. Marcus and I had refinanced just 18 months ago, and our rate was already excellent. More importantly, we'd specifically decided against taking cash out because we wanted to pay down the principal faster. For Matthew to suggest the opposite meant this wasn't casual conversation. It was part of their operation. "What kind of renovations were you thinking about?" I asked. "Maybe the kitchen, update the appliances. Or we could finish the basement, turn it into a proper office space." Neither of those projects made sense. We'd renovated the kitchen 3 years ago, and Marcus had always claimed he preferred working upstairs where he could see the garden. But if Matthew was pushing for a cash-out refinance, it meant they were planning to extract more money from my financial life before disappearing. "That sounds expensive," I said carefully. "We can afford it. My commissions have been really strong this quarter, and I've got some consulting work coming in that should cover the costs." More lies. According to Lisa's research, Marcus hadn't received any legitimate real estate commissions in months. The consulting work was either money laundering or completely fictional. I excused myself to get dessert from the refrigerator, using the moment away from his direct line of sight to text Lisa, his pushing for cash-out refi. Their accelerating timeline. My phone buzzed with her response almost immediately. "Found financial records. Much worse than we thought. Michelle will be here in 2 hours." When I returned to the table, Matthew was looking at his phone with an expression I'd never seen on Marcus's face. Cold, calculating, completely devoid of the warmth that had first attracted me to my husband. "Everything okay?" I asked. The warmth snapped back into place so quickly I almost doubted I'd seen its absence. "Just work stuff. The Henderson deal is moving faster than expected." I nodded and served dessert, noting how he'd returned to the fictional Henderson deal as his default cover story. Amateur mistake. Good liars varied their explanations to avoid creating patterns that could be traced. We finished dinner with light conversation about weekend plans and upcoming social events, and I marveled at how normal it all felt despite the underlying current of deception flowing in both directions. Matthew played the role of attentive husband perfectly, asking about my work projects, commenting on the meal, even helping clear the dishes with the same casual efficiency Marcus had shown for years. But as the evening progressed, small cracks began to appear in his performance. He couldn't find the coffee filters, which were kept in the same cabinet they'd been in for 3 years. He used the wrong setting on the dishwasher, something Marcus would never have done given his obsessive attention to appliance care. Most tellingly, when I mentioned that my sister Jenna had called earlier, he showed no reaction whatsoever, despite the fact that the real Marcus knew Jenna was a pilot and would have been curious about her travel stories. By 9 p.m., I was confident that Matthew's knowledge of my life with Marcus was extensive but not complete, and that he was becoming comfortable enough to let his guard down. Which meant it was time for the next phase of our plan. "I'm going to take a bath and read for a while," I announced, stretching as if tired from a long day. That new mystery novel I ordered finally arrived. "Sounds good," Matthew said, settling onto the couch with the remote control. "I think there's a baseball game on tonight." Marcus hated baseball. He'd rather watch paint dry than sit through 9 innings of what he called the most boring sport ever invented. The fact that Matthew didn't know this confirmed that their operation, sophisticated as it was, had gaps in intelligence that we could exploit. I went upstairs and ran a bath, making sure the water was loud enough to cover any sounds of movement. Then I texted Lisa, his distracted. "Baseball game. Safe to proceed." Her response was immediate, already inside Manhattan apartment. "What I'm finding is unbelievable. Keep him busy for another hour." I sank into the hot water and tried to process the surreal reality of my situation. Downstairs, a criminal was watching television in my living room, playing the role of my husband while his identical twin brother was presumably in Ohio with another woman who also believed she was legally married. Meanwhile, a woman I'd met yesterday was breaking into an apartment that belonged to my husband's fake identity, searching for evidence of crimes I was only beginning to understand. 6 months ago, the most exciting thing in my life was choosing new curtains for the guest bedroom. Now I was actively participating in what amounted to a counterintelligence operation against my own husband. The strangest part was how natural it felt. Not the deception itself, but the clarity that came with finally understanding the rules of the game I'd been unknowingly playing for years. For the first time since Jenna's call, I felt like I had some measure of control over my circumstances. My phone buzzed with another text from Lisa. "Rebecca, you need to see this. Can you get away tomorrow morning? What I found changes everything." I responded, "What did you find?" "Not over text. Too dangerous. Meet me at the same place tomorrow at 10 a.m. And Rebecca, bring everything you can find about your mortgage, your business accounts, and any life insurance policies Marcus has taken out." Life insurance policies. The implications of that request made my blood freeze. Were they planning something more permanent than just disappearing with our money? I forced myself to stay in the bath for another 20 minutes, giving Lisa time to complete her search and Matthew time to settle into his evening routine. When I finally went downstairs in my robe, I found him exactly where I'd left him, watching the baseball game with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested in the outcome. "Good game?" I asked, settling next to him on the couch. "Yankees are up by 3 in the 7th inning," he replied without taking his eyes off the screen. It was a perfectly normal response, except for one problem. The game was between the Red Sox and the Orioles. The Yankees weren't even playing. I smiled and curled up against his shoulder, letting him think I was tired and content while my mind raced with the implications of what Lisa had discovered. Whatever she'd found in that Manhattan apartment was serious enough that she was worried about discussing it over text messages. And if she was asking about life insurance policies, it meant the danger we were facing was far more immediate than we'd realized. If you're watching this and you've ever realized that someone you trusted completely was not just lying to you, but was actively planning something that could destroy your life, please take a moment to subscribe and share this story. Because what Lisa found that night, what she showed me the next morning, revealed that our husbands weren't just criminals, they were part of something so much darker that it changed everything about how we had to fight back. Matthew's arm tightened around me, and for just a moment, muscle memory kicked in and I felt safe. But then I remembered that this wasn't Marcus. This was a stranger who had studied my husband well enough to steal his identity and his place in my bed. The warmth I felt wasn't real. The safety was an illusion. And tomorrow, I would learn just how much danger I'd been living with all along. The next morning, I sat across from Lisa in the same spot by the Hudson River, but everything felt different. She looked like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, a haunted quality that made my stomach clench with dread. "Before I show you what I found," she said, her voice hoarse, "I need you to promise me that you won't panic. What we're dealing with is bigger and more dangerous than we thought, but we can handle it if we stay smart." I nodded, though my hands were already shaking. "Show me." Lisa opened a thick manila envelope and spread its contents across the park bench between us. Financial documents, photographs, handwritten notes, and what looked like surveillance reports. The sheer volume of paperwork was overwhelming, but it was the photographs that made my breath catch in my throat. Pictures of me. Dozens of them, taken over the course of months without my knowledge. Me leaving my house, grocery shopping, meeting clients, even sleeping in my own bed. The invasion of privacy was staggering, but what made it truly terrifying was the clinical notation written on each photo, timestamps, location details, behavioral observations. "They've been watching all of us," Lisa said quietly. "Not just Marcus and Matthew, but a whole team. Professional surveillance, psychological profiling, financial analysis. We're not just wives, Rebecca. We're case studies." I picked up one of the photographs, me sitting in my garden last month, completely unaware I was being watched, and saw my own handwriting in the margin. Except it wasn't my handwriting. Someone had forged my signature so perfectly that I couldn't tell the difference. How is this possible? Because we're not their first victims. According to the records I found, Marcus and Matthew have been running variations of this operation for at least 12 years. They've refined it, perfected it, turned it into a science. And they're working for someone who has the resources to make it happen on this scale. Lisa handed me a document that made my blood run cold. It was a contract, written in legal language, but the basic terms were clear. Marcus and Matthew were employed by something called Meridian Acquisition Services to identify, cultivate, and maintain long-term relationships with financially stable women for the purpose of asset extraction and identity harvesting. Asset extraction and identity harvesting, I repeated, the clinical terms somehow more frightening than plain language would have been. They don't just steal our money, Rebecca. They steal our entire identities. Credit ratings, business connections, professional reputations, even our personal relationships. By the time they're done with us, we don't just lose our assets, we lose our ability to rebuild our lives. She showed me another set of documents, financial records that trace the movement of money from accounts belonging to women I'd never heard of. Sarah Mitchell from Portland, whose graphic design business had been used to launder money for 3 years before she mysteriously died in a car accident. Jennifer Lawson from Denver, whose import company had been gutted financially before she committed suicide. At least 8 women over the past decade, all of whom had been married to men who looked exactly like Marcus. "They're not twins," I whispered, understanding finally dawning. "No. There are at least 4 of them that I've identified so far. Identical quadruplets, all working together, all playing different roles in the operation. Marcus and Matthew are just 2 of them." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Not just twin brothers running a con, but an entire family of identical men, each capable of assuming the other's identities, working together to systematically destroy women's lives on an industrial scale. "But why?" I asked. "If they wanted money, there are easier ways to steal it." Lisa's expression darkened further. "Because money isn't the end goal. It's just the means to an end." She handed me the most disturbing document yet, a psychological profile with my name on it, but filled with details about my personality, my fears, my vulnerabilities that were so accurate it felt like someone had crawled inside my mind and mapped every corner. "They don't just want our money," Lisa continued. "They want us. Broken, isolated, dependent, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. The women who don't recover from this operation, who end up isolated and traumatized, become long-term assets for the organization. What do you mean? Human trafficking, Rebecca. Not the kind where they kidnap people off the street, but the kind where they systematically destroy someone's life until staying with their abusers becomes the only option that seems viable. Some of the women they've targeted have been trapped in this cycle for years, moved from city to city, living under false identities, completely cut off from any support system. I stared at the psychological profile, seeing my own fears and insecurities laid out like a roadmap for my destruction. They knew I was conflict-averse, that I would rather endure unhappiness than confront difficult truths. They knew I was financially conservative, which made me a good target for long-term asset extraction. They knew I was socially isolated, with few close friends outside of family, which meant fewer people would notice if I gradually disappeared from my normal life. How many women are currently trapped in this system? I don't know. But based on the financial records, I think at least 20 are actively being exploited right now. 20 women, living lives that weren't really their lives, married to men who weren't really their husbands, funding an operation designed to destroy them completely. The evil of it was so comprehensive, so carefully planned, that I felt a kind of awe for the sheer scope of the cruelty involved. Lisa, I said, looking up from the documents, we can't handle this alone. This isn't something 4 angry wives can solve with a revenge plot. This is organized crime on a massive scale. You're right, she said. Which is why we're not going to handle it alone. She pulled out her phone and showed me a contact entry. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Your sister. My older sister. She's been working financial crimes for 8 years, and when I told her what we'd discovered, she opened an unofficial investigation. The Bureau has been looking for this organization for 3 years, but they've never been able to get close enough to gather evidence. The operations are too sophisticated, the identities too well constructed. But now they have inside access. 4 inside sources with detailed financial records, photographs, and first-hand knowledge of how the operation works. Sarah says it's the break they've been waiting for. I felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. So we turn over everything to the FBI and let them handle it. Lisa's expression was grim. It's not that simple. Sarah estimates it will take months to build a case strong enough for prosecution, and during that time, Marcus and Matthew will be free to continue operating. They could disappear at any moment, taking all the evidence with them. Or worse, they could decide that we've become liabilities. She showed me another photograph from the stack, this one of Michelle from Phoenix, taken through what looked like a telephoto lens. Michelle was walking to her car in what appeared to be a parking garage, completely unaware she was being watched. This was taken yesterday morning, Lisa said. After Michelle contacted me, but before she flew out here to meet with us. They know we're communicating with each other, and they're escalating their surveillance. The implications were terrifying. If they knew we'd discovered the truth, if they knew we were working together to expose them, then we were all in immediate danger. What does your sister recommend? A controlled operation. We continue to act normally while feeding information to the FBI, but we also set a trap. Something that will force them to reveal the full scope of their operation and give the Bureau enough evidence to make arrests. What kind of trap? Lisa smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it was a genuinely predatory expression. We give them exactly what they want. A big score that's too tempting to pass up. Something that will require all 4 brothers to participate and expose the entire network at once. She pulled out a final document, a bank statement showing an account balance that made my eyes widen. 7 figures, in an account I'd never seen before. This is Marcus's emergency fund. Money has been siphoning from all of his victims over the years, kept in a secure account for when the operation needs to shut down quickly. According to these records, he's planning to liquidate everything and disappear within the next month. How do you know all this? Because I found his laptop in the Manhattan apartment. Encrypted, but my sister has resources at the Bureau that can crack encryption. The entire operation is laid out in digital files, target profiles, financial projections, escape routes, contingency plans. I stared at the bank statement, understanding finally dawning. You want to steal his emergency fund. I want to use it as bait. We're going to let him think one of us has discovered the account and is planning to steal the money for ourselves. He'll have to bring in all 4 brothers to protect that large an asset, and when they do, the FBI will be waiting. It was elegant, audacious, and terrifying. Using the criminals' own greed and paranoia against them, forcing them into a situation where they'd expose themselves completely in an attempt to protect their stolen wealth. What's my role in this? You're going to be the bait. Tomorrow night, you're going to confront Matthew about the money, let him think you've discovered the account and are planning to take it. He'll panic and call in the others, and we'll finally have them all in one place at the same time. And if something goes wrong? If they decide I'm too dangerous to keep alive? Lisa's expression softened slightly. Then we make sure nothing goes wrong. Sarah will have a full FBI surveillance team in place, and Michelle and I will be close enough to help if you need backup. I looked out over the Hudson River, watching boats navigate the current, and tried to imagine myself as the kind of person who could successfully manipulate professional criminals. It seemed impossible, but then again, everything about my life for the past week had seemed impossible. If you're watching this and you've ever had to choose between safety and justice, between running away and fighting back, comment below and tell me what you decided. Because what we were planning, what we were about to attempt, would either save 20 women from lives of exploitation or get all of us killed. I turned back to Lisa, seeing my own determination reflected in her eyes. When do we start? The next evening, I prepared for what could very well be the last conversation of my life. I'd spent the day rehearsing with Lisa and her FBI sister Sarah, practicing how to seem angry without appearing threatening, how to demand answers without revealing how much I actually knew. The performance had to be perfect. One wrong note and I could end up like the women in those files who'd simply vanished. Matthew arrived home at 6:30, exactly on schedule, carrying takeout from the Thai restaurant we'd ordered from dozens of times over the years. Everything about his demeanor was carefully crafted normalcy, but I could see the tension in his shoulders that suggested he knew something was wrong. Rough day? I asked, accepting the bag of food and setting it on the counter without opening it. The usual chaos. The Henderson deal is getting more complicated by the hour. Still with the Henderson lie. I'd spent the morning researching and confirmed that no such deal existed anywhere in Marcus's professional network. It was a completely fabricated cover story, which meant Matthew was either lazy or he thought I was too stupid to check up on his explanations. Both possibilities made me angry, and anger, I'd learned, was an excellent fuel for what I was about to do. Matthew, I said, deliberately using his real name and watching his reaction. He froze, a plastic container of pad thai halfway to the microwave. What did you call me? I called you by your name. Matthew. Because that's who you are, isn't it? The transformation was instant and terrifying. The familiar warmth drained from his expression, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd never seen on Marcus's face. His posture shifted, becoming more alert, more dangerous. In the space of 3 seconds, the man I'd thought I knew disappeared entirely. I think you're confused, he said carefully, setting down the takeout and turning to face me fully. I'm Marcus. Your husband. No, you're not. Marcus is in Ohio with his other wife, Charlotte. You're his brother Matthew, and you've been covering for him whenever he needs to be in 2 places at once. Matthew's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket pocket, and I remembered Sarah's warning that these men would likely be armed. My pulse hammered against my throat, but I forced myself to maintain eye contact. Where did you hear that name? His voice was flat, professional, completely devoid of any emotion that had ever characterized my conversations with Marcus. Does it matter? What matters is that I know the truth. I know about the other wives, the fake businesses, the money you've been stealing from all of us. I know everything. That was a lie, but it was delivered with enough conviction that Matthew's expression shifted again. Now he looked genuinely concerned rather than just cautious. Rebecca, I think you've been talking to someone who's filling your head with crazy ideas. Maybe you should sit down and we can work through this together." His tone was patronizing, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions. It was probably a technique that had worked on other women, other victims who'd started asking inconvenient questions. But I'd spent days preparing for this moment, and I knew exactly how to respond. "I've seen the bank account, Matthew. The one with $7 million that Marcus has been filling with money stolen from women like me. I know where it is, I know how to access it, and I know you're planning to clean it out and disappear within the month." Now Matthew went completely still, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes as he calculated the implications of what I'd just said. If I knew about the emergency fund, it meant his operation was compromised far more seriously than he'd realized. "That's a very dangerous thing to claim, you know," he said quietly. "It's a very dangerous thing to steal $7 million from women whose lives you've systematically destroyed. What do you want?" The question was exactly what Lisa had predicted he would ask. When criminals are caught, their first instinct isn't denial, it's negotiation. "I want my share. Half of what you stole from me, plus interest, plus compensation for the 8 years of my life you've wasted. Call it $2 million. Matthew laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this is some kind of divorce settlement? You think you can just demand money and I'll write you a check? I think you're going to give me what I'm asking for, or I'm going to take it myself. I have the account information, Matthew. I can clean out that entire $7 million before you and Marcus even realize it's gone." It was another lie, but it was the key piece of bait that would force him to call in reinforcements. No criminal could afford to let a victim walk away with evidence of their entire operation, especially when that evidence included access to their emergency funds. Matthew pulled out his phone, keeping his eyes locked on mine while he scrolled to a contact. "I need to make a call." "Go ahead." He walked into the living room, speaking in low tones that I couldn't quite make out. Through the doorway, I could see him pacing, his free hand gesturing emphatically. He was agitated, probably explaining the situation to Marcus and requesting backup. After 10 minutes, he returned to the kitchen, his expression calmer but somehow more menacing. "Marcus is coming home tonight instead of tomorrow. He wants to talk to you personally about this misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding. And I don't want to talk to Marcus. I want to talk to whoever is really in charge of this operation." Matthew's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think Marcus isn't in charge?" "Because I've seen the organizational charts, the employment contracts, the financial structures. Marcus and you are employees, not owners. You work for Meridian Acquisition Services, and I want to negotiate with whoever runs that company." I was pushing harder than Lisa had recommended, but Matthew's reaction told me I was on the right track. His carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing genuine surprise that I knew about the larger organization. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been betrayed by someone I trusted for 8 years. It tends to motivate thorough research." Matthew nodded slowly, as if coming to some internal decision. "All right. If you want to meet the people who run this organization, that can be arranged. But Rebecca, you need to understand that once you go down this path, there's no going back to your normal life." My normal life was a lie. There's nothing to go back to. He studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I was bluffing or genuinely prepared for the consequences of what I was demanding. "They'll be here tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. And Rebecca, if you're planning something stupid, if you've involved law enforcement or if this is some kind of setup, they'll know within minutes of walking through that door. I'm not planning anything except getting what's owed to me. We'll see." Matthew left the house without another word, and I immediately texted Lisa, "Hook is set. They're bringing in the bosses tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Her response was immediate, "FBI is monitoring. Stay safe. This is almost over." But as I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd thought was real, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just beginning. The next 24 hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions of normalcy, answering work emails, grocery shopping, even calling my mother to chat about weekend plans as if my world wasn't about to explode. Every mundane activity felt surreal, like I was playing a character in someone else's story while waiting for the real plot to begin. Sarah had briefed me on what to expect. The FBI surveillance team would be in position by 7 p.m., with agents positioned across the street and in a van parked 2 blocks away. I would be wearing a wire, hidden so expertly that even professional criminals wouldn't detect it unless they physically searched me. My job was simple: keep them talking, get them to reveal as much as possible about their operation, and stay alive long enough for the cavalry to arrive if things went wrong. Simple. Right. At 7:45 p.m., I was sitting in my living room, wearing a blue dress that Sarah had chosen because it would hide the recording equipment effectively, when I heard cars pulling into my driveway. Multiple cars, which meant they'd brought more people than just Marcus and the mysterious bosses. Through the front window, I watched 4 men get out of 2 black sedans. Marcus, who I recognized immediately despite not having seen him in person for over a week. Matthew, looking grimmer than I'd ever seen him. And 2 other men who looked exactly like my husband but with subtle differences in styling and demeanor that suggested they were the other brothers Lisa had mentioned. 4 identical men, walking toward my front door, about to enter my home for a conversation that would either end with justice or with my death. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 p.m. I opened it to find Marcus standing on my doorstep, looking like the man I'd fallen in love with 9 years ago, but with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "Hello, Rebecca," he said, as if we were casual acquaintances meeting for coffee rather than a woman confronting her husband about years of systematic deception. "Marcus." The 4 men filed into my living room, and seeing them all together was like looking at a funhouse mirror, the same face repeated with minor variations, each one representing a different aspect of the elaborate lie my life had become. "I understand you've discovered some information about our business operations," said one of the men I didn't recognize, settling into the armchair that had been Marcus's favorite spot for watching television. "I understand you've been systematically destroying women's lives for over a decade," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The man smiled, and it was Marcus's smile but somehow more predatory. "That's a very dramatic way to describe a business relationship. We provide services, companionship, security, financial management, in exchange for compensation. It's not our fault if some of our clients develop unrealistic expectations about the nature of the arrangement." "Clients? Is that what you call the women you marry under false pretenses?" "We call them what they are, willing participants in mutually beneficial relationships. No one forced you to marry Marcus, Rebecca. No one forced you to give him access to your finances or your business connections. You made those choices because you received value in return." The casual cruelty of his words, the way he reduced 8 years of my life to a simple business transaction, made me understand why some of the women in those files had chosen suicide rather than trying to rebuild their lives. "What value?" I asked. "What did I receive in exchange for funding your criminal enterprise?" "Stability. Companionship. The illusion of love and partnership. For most women, that illusion is worth far more than money." Marcus, the real Marcus, spoke for the first time since entering my house. "Rebecca, what Matthew told me about your demands, the money you think you're entitled to, it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation." "Enlighten me." "You don't have any leverage here. You don't have evidence that would stand up in court, you don't have access to accounts you can't prove exist, and you don't have any way to damage our operation without destroying your own life in the process." He was wrong on all counts, but I couldn't let them know that without revealing the FBI involvement. "I have photographs, financial records, documentation of your multiple identities and bigamous marriages. I have enough evidence to destroy all of you." The man who seemed to be their leader leaned forward, his expression interested rather than concerned. "Show me." It was a test, and I'd just failed it. If I'd actually had the evidence I claimed, I would have been able to produce at least some of it immediately. My hesitation told them everything they needed to know about the weakness of my position. "I'm not stupid enough to keep evidence in a house where you have access. But you're stupid enough to threaten us without having that evidence immediately available," the leader said. Which suggests that you're either bluffing about what you know, or you've involved someone else in this situation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. These men hadn't built a criminal enterprise this sophisticated by being careless about threats to their operation. Who else knows about this, Rebecca? Marcus asked, and his voice held a gentleness that was more frightening than outright threats would have been. No one. That's not true. Matthew reported that you knew his real name before yesterday, which means someone told you. You knew details about our organization that aren't available through casual research. And most importantly, you knew about the emergency fund, which is information that only 4 people in the world have access to. The leader pulled out a tablet and showed me a photograph that made my heart stop. It was Lisa, taken yesterday morning outside her Manhattan apartment, but with a red X drawn across her face. Lisa Chen contacted us 3 days ago, he said conversationally. She wanted to negotiate the same kind of deal you're asking for. Unfortunately, Ms. Chen overestimated her leverage just like you have. What did you do to her? What we do to anyone who threatens our operation. We eliminated the threat. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made me realize that I was in far more danger than even Sarah had anticipated. These weren't just con artists who'd gotten in over their heads, they were professional killers who'd built their entire operation around the systematic destruction of human lives. Now, the leader continued, I'm going to ask you one more time, who else knows about our organization, and what evidence do they have access to? I looked around the room at 4 faces that looked like the man I'd loved, knowing that my answer would determine whether I lived through the next hour. If you're watching this and you've ever been in a situation where telling the truth might get you killed, but lying definitely will, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happened next, what I discovered about just how far these men were willing to go to protect their operation, changed everything about how I understood the game we were playing. I took a deep breath and made the choice that would either save my life or end it. Lisa Chen is dead, isn't she? The leader's smile told me everything I needed to know. The confirmation that Lisa was dead hit me like a physical blow, but it also crystallized something important. I was no longer trying to get revenge or recover stolen money. I was fighting for my life, and the lives of at least 20 other women who were trapped in this nightmare. Lisa was a problem that solved itself, the leader said, sliding the tablet back into his jacket. She had convinced herself that she could outsmart us, that she could find some way to expose our operation without consequences. She was wrong. How? The word came out as barely a whisper. Car accident. Very tragic. Brake failure on a mountain road outside Denver. These things happen when people drive recklessly. I thought about Lisa's careful intelligence, her methodical approach to uncovering the truth, the way she'd insisted on having FBI backup for everything we planned. She hadn't been reckless, she'd been murdered by professionals who knew how to make murder look accidental. The question now, Marcus said, leaning back in what had been his favorite chair for 8 years, is whether you're going to be smart enough to learn from Lisa's mistake. What mistake was that? Thinking she had allies who could protect her. The implication was clear. They knew about FBI involvement, which meant Sarah's investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Either there was a leak in the bureau, or these men had resources even more sophisticated than we'd realized. Here's what's going to happen, the leader continued. You're going to sign some documents transferring ownership of this house and your business assets to Marcus. You're going to withdraw the maximum cash advances available on all your credit cards and give that money to us. And then you're going to disappear. Disappear where? That depends on how cooperative you are over the next few hours. I looked around my living room, at the furniture I'd chosen, the photographs of the life I'd thought was real, the home I'd worked so hard to create. In a matter of minutes, it would all belong to criminals who'd viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be harvested. But what they didn't know was that Sarah's team was listening to every word of this conversation. Even if the investigation had been compromised, even if they knew about FBI interest in their operation, they couldn't know about the wire I was wearing or the agents positioned outside my house. I hoped. What if I refuse? Matthew answered this time, his voice carrying the same false gentleness Marcus had used earlier. Then you'll join Lisa on a mountain road somewhere, and will forge your signature on the documents anyway. You can't forge signatures on legal documents and expect them to hold up. We've been forging your signature for years, Rebecca. Every contract, every refinancing agreement, every business deal Marcus signed on your behalf. You never questioned any of it because you trusted him completely. The revelation that even my legal identity had been compromised for years was devastating, but it also meant they'd left an extensive paper trail of forgery that could be used as evidence. If Sarah's team was still operational, if the FBI could move quickly enough, there might still be a chance to stop this. I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing up slowly and hoping I could reach the panic button Sarah had given me without alerting the 4 men watching my every move. Sit down, the leader said sharply. You're not going anywhere until we finish our business. I'm not trying to escape. I just need to use the bathroom. Matthew will escort you. My heart sank. If Matthew came with me, I couldn't access the panic button, and I couldn't send any signal to the FBI team. I would have to find another way to trigger their intervention. That's not necessary. I'll be right back. I insist. Matthew stood up and gestured toward the hallway, his hand resting casually on the bulge in his jacket that I now realized was definitely a weapon. As we walked toward the bathroom, I tried to think of some way to create enough commotion to alert the surveillance team that the situation had escalated. Rebecca, Matthew said quietly as we reached the bathroom door, I want you to know that none of this is personal. You seem like a nice person, and under different circumstances, I think we might have been friends. But you're going to kill me anyway. Only if you make it necessary. There are other options: relocation, new identity, a different kind of life. It's not ideal, but it's survivable. Like the other women in your files? The ones who've been trafficked around the country for years. Matthew's expression hardened. Those women chose their situations. They could have walked away at any time. With no money, no identity, no support system, and the constant threat of being killed if they tried to expose you. Everyone makes choices, Rebecca. You're about to make yours. I went into the bathroom and closed the door, my mind racing through possible options. The window was too small to escape through, and even if I could get out, Matthew would hear me and alert the others. I could try to create noise that would bring the FBI team, but if they were already compromised, that might just result in a shootout with me in the crossfire. Then I remembered something Sarah had told me during our preparation. If the situation goes completely sideways, if you're in immediate physical danger with no other options, break the mirror. The sound will trigger our emergency response protocol. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, seeing the face of a woman who'd been living a lie for 8 years without knowing it. Then I picked up the heavy ceramic soap dispenser and smashed it into the glass. The sound was explosive, far louder than I'd expected. Within seconds, Matthew was pounding on the door. Rebecca, what happened? Open the door. I knocked something over. I'm fine. Open the door now. I unlocked it and found Matthew standing there with his weapon drawn, his eyes scanning the bathroom quickly before settling on the shattered mirror. What did you break that for? It was an accident. I lost my balance. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the living room, where the other 3 men were all on their feet, looking agitated. She broke the bathroom mirror, Matthew reported. Why? The leader asked, staring at me with the intensity of someone trying to read my thoughts. She says it was an accident. It was an accident, I repeated, but I could see in their expressions that none of them believed me. Search her, the leader ordered. Matthew's hands moved over my dress with professional efficiency, and within seconds he'd found the wire taped under my ribs. Well, he said, holding up the tiny recording device. Rebecca has been entertaining company this evening. The leader looked at the wire, then at me, his expression shifting from annoyance to genuine anger. FBI. I didn't answer, but my silence was confirmation enough. How long? Marcus asked. How long what? How long have you been working with federal agents? Still, I said nothing. There was no point in lying now, and no advantage to giving them information they could use to protect themselves. The leader pulled out his phone and made a call. We have a problem at the Westchester location. Federal surveillance. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7. I had no idea what that meant, but the tone of his voice suggested it involved serious escalation of violence. Rebecca, Marcus said, sitting back down and looking almost sad, you've made this much more complicated than it needed to be. Good. No, not good. Because now instead of just relocating you, we have to eliminate you and everyone you've involved in this situation. Your sister Jenna, for instance. We know she was the one who first spotted us, and we can't have airline employees who might recognize us in the future. My blood went cold. Leave Jenna out of this. She doesn't know anything except what she saw on that one flight. She knows enough to be dangerous. And unfortunately, now that we know federal agents are involved, we have to assume that anyone connected to you represents a security threat. Through the living room window, I could see movement in the darkness outside, shadows shifting, people positioning themselves. The FBI team was finally moving, but would they be fast enough to prevent these men from escaping or killing me first? You're surrounded, I said, hoping to buy time. Even if you kill me, you won't make it out of this neighborhood. The leader smiled and pulled out what looked like a small remote control. Actually, we will. Because we've been planning for this possibility for quite some time. He pressed a button, and I heard a distant explosion that shook the windows of my house. That was the FBI surveillance van, he said conversationally. Remote detonated charge, placed there about an hour ago while they were focused on your house. As for the agents positioned across the street, well, they're about to have a very bad night. The sound of gunfire erupted outside, automatic weapons fire that shattered the quiet suburban evening. I watched through the window as muzzle flashes lit up the darkness, realizing that the FBI team hadn't just been compromised, they'd been ambushed. Protocol 7, the leader explained, is what we implement when law enforcement gets too close to our operation. We eliminate the immediate threat, extract all personnel, and shut down all current operations. More explosions in the distance, and the acrid smell of smoke began seeping through the windows. How many people are you going to kill tonight? I asked. As many as necessary. Marcus stood up and walked over to where I was sitting, kneeling down so we were at eye level. I'm sorry it came to this, Rebecca. I really am. For what it's worth, the time we spent together, parts of it were real. I did care about you, in my way. Not enough to stop lying to me. No, not enough for that. He nodded to Matthew, who moved behind my chair. I felt the cold metal of a gun barrel against the back of my neck. If anyone watching this has ever faced a moment where everything they thought they knew about right and wrong, about justice and survival, got stripped away in an instant, please remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to do the right thing despite being terrified. Because what I did next, what I chose in what I thought were my final seconds, changed everything. I closed my eyes and thought about Lisa, about the 20 other women trapped in this system, about my sister Jenna who was now apparently a target for murder simply because she tried to help me. Then I opened my eyes, looked directly at Marcus, and spoke the words that would either save my life or end it. Sarah Chen isn't my only contact at the FBI. And this operation isn't as secret as you think it is. The gun barrel pressed against my neck went very still, and I could feel Matthew's breathing change behind me. In the silence that followed my statement, I could hear the distant sounds of sirens approaching, not from one direction, but from multiple directions, as if the entire neighborhood was being surrounded. What do you mean? The leader asked, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge I hadn't heard before. I mean that Sarah Chen was never the only federal agent involved in investigating your operation. She was just the only one you knew about. It was a complete bluff, but it was delivered with enough conviction that all 4 men exchanged glances. In criminal operations this sophisticated, paranoia about law enforcement penetration is a constant concern, and the possibility that their intelligence about FBI involvement was incomplete would be terrifying to them. You're lying, Marcus said. but there was uncertainty in his voice.
Am I?
Then explain why there are sirens coming from 4 different directions instead of just one. Explain why your Protocol 7 didn't eliminate all the surveillance, just the obvious surveillance. The leader pulled out his phone and made another call, speaking in rapid, urgent tones. From what I could hear of his side of the conversation, things were not going according to their plan. The extraction routes are blocked, he reported to the others. Multiple federal task forces, not just FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals. Someone leaked the Protocol 7 response plan. That's impossible, Matthew said, the gun barrel wavering slightly against my neck. Only 5 people knew about Protocol 7. 6, I corrected. You forgot about the person who's been feeding information to federal investigators for the past 8 months. Another complete lie, but the beauty of paranoia is that it feeds on itself. Once criminals start suspecting that their operation has been compromised, they begin seeing evidence of betrayal everywhere.
Who?
The leader demanded. I don't know. Sarah never told me the identity of their inside source. But someone in your organization has been providing detailed intelligence about your operations, your personnel, your safe houses, your escape routes. Everything. The 4 men were now looking at each other with open suspicion, and I could see the carefully maintained unity of their criminal partnership beginning to fracture under pressure. It's not possible, Marcus said, but he was looking at his brothers with the same suspicion they were showing him.
Really?
Then how do you explain the fact that federal agents knew exactly when and where to position surveillance? How do you explain them having detailed financial records of your operations? How do you explain them knowing about Lisa Chen before she ever contacted you? That last part was pure improvisation, but it landed with devastating effect. The leader's face went completely white. Lisa contacted us, he said slowly. We didn't contact her. Are you sure about that? Or did someone in your organization suggest that Lisa needed to be eliminated because she was getting too close to the truth? Someone who was actually protecting their role as a federal informant by removing a woman who might have exposed them. The gun barrel disappeared from my neck as Matthew stepped away, turning to face the other 3 men with his weapon now pointed at them instead of me. Which one of you has been talking to the feds? He demanded. Matthew, don't be ridiculous, Marcus started to say, but he was interrupted by the sound of helicopters approaching overhead. Through the living room windows, I could see spotlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating my house and the surrounding area with daylight intensity. A voice boomed through a megaphone, amplified and authoritative. This is the FBI. The house is surrounded. Exit through the front door with your hands visible and no sudden movements. The leader looked at his phone, then at the windows, then at his 3 partners who were all now pointing weapons at each other in a circle of mutual suspicion. This is completely fucked, he said, with the first genuine emotion I'd heard from him all evening. Someone betrayed us, Matthew said, his gun swinging between Marcus and the 4th brother I still didn't know by name. Or someone is smarter than the rest of us, Marcus replied, pulling his own weapon and pointing it at Matthew. I realized that my improvised paranoia campaign had been more effective than I'd dared hope. These 4 men, who had operated as a coordinated team for over a decade, were now completely focused on determining which of them was the traitor, a traitor who didn't actually exist. The megaphone voice spoke again. You have 60 seconds to exit the building. After that, we're coming in. We need to move, the leader said, holstering his weapon and heading toward what I assumed was a back exit. Figure out the informant situation later. But Matthew didn't lower his gun. No. We settle this now. Someone in this room has been feeding information to the feds, and I'm not leaving until I know who. Matthew, this is not the time, Marcus said, but he didn't lower his weapon either. It's exactly the time. Because if there's an informant, they're going to make sure the rest of us get caught while they disappear into witness protection. The 4th brother, who hadn't spoken since entering my house, finally found his voice. This is insane. We don't have time for this paranoid bullshit. Paranoid. Matthew laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. Rebecca just told us that someone has been informing on us for 8 months. Federal agents had details about our operation that only we knew. Lisa Chen was eliminated based on information that someone provided to us about her activities. If that's not evidence of betrayal, what is? It's evidence that we underestimated federal intelligence capabilities, the leader said, but even he sounded less certain than before. Through the windows, I could see figures in tactical gear positioning themselves around the house. The helicopters were getting closer, their rotor wash strong enough to rattle the windows. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen soon. 30 seconds, the megaphone announced. The leader made a decision. We're leaving. All of us, right now, through the basement tunnel. Whoever the informant is, we'll sort it out once we're clear. There's a basement tunnel? I asked, genuinely surprised. You think we'd operate out of a location without multiple exit strategies? Marcus said, but he was already moving toward what I'd always thought was a storage closet under the stairs. Of course there was a tunnel. These men had been planning for contingencies like this for years, which meant the FBI siege might not be as decisive as I'd hoped. But as the four brothers headed toward their escape route, still pointing weapons at each other, I realized that my improvised psychological warfare had accomplished something important. I was no longer their primary concern. They were too busy suspecting each other to focus on eliminating me. Rebecca, Marcus said, pausing at the closet door, you're coming with us. Like hell I am. You're our insurance policy. If federal agents want you back alive, they won't risk a direct assault on our position. The megaphone spoke again. This is your final warning. Exit now or we're coming in. Matthew grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the closet, where the leader was already opening what looked like a standard wooden door but was actually heavy steel disguised with a wood veneer. Beyond it, I could see a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Move, he ordered, pushing me toward the stairs. As I stumbled down into the basement tunnel, I could hear the front door of my house being breached behind us. Federal agents were finally inside, but they were too late to prevent my abduction by four criminals who were too paranoid to trust each other and too desperate to let me go. The tunnel was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Concrete walls, electric lighting, ventilation systems. It ran in a straight line away from my house, presumably emerging somewhere far enough away that the FBI perimeter wouldn't extend to cover it. How long is this tunnel? I asked, more to keep them talking than because I expected an answer. Long enough, the leader replied. But as we walked through the underground passage, I could hear something that made my heart race with hope. Water. Running water, getting louder as we moved forward. We were heading toward the stream that ran behind my neighborhood, which meant the tunnel would emerge somewhere along the creek bed. If federal agents had studied aerial photographs of the area, if they'd anticipated the possibility of underground escape routes, they might have positioned surveillance along the water as well. Stop, Matthew said suddenly, holding up his hand. We all froze, listening. In the distance, I could hear voices echoing through the tunnel from behind us, federal agents who discovered the entrance and were following us underground. They're in the tunnel, the fourth brother said, stating the obvious. Which means the informant told them about the escape route, Matthew replied, turning his weapon on Marcus. How did they know to look for a tunnel? Maybe because they're competent investigators, Marcus shot back. Maybe because tunnel systems are standard operating procedure for operations like ours. Or maybe because someone told them exactly where to look. The paranoia was reaching a breaking point, and I realized that the confined space of the tunnel was making the situation even more volatile. Four armed criminals, convinced that one of them was a traitor, trapped underground with federal agents closing in from behind. It was a powder keg, and all it needed was one spark to explode. You know what? I said, loud enough to get all their attention. You want to know who the informant is? It's me. The lie was so audacious, so completely unexpected, that all four men stopped moving and stared at me. What? The leader said. I've been working with federal investigators for over a year. Not just Sarah Chen, but a whole task force. Everything you think you know about me, every conversation we've had, every piece of information I've given you about my life, it's all been carefully orchestrated to gather intelligence about your operation. It was complete fiction, but it was delivered with enough conviction that I could see doubt flickering in their eyes. "That's impossible," Marcus said.
Is it?
"Think about it, Marcus. Who suggested you target me in the first place? Who put my name on whatever list you used to identify potential victims? Who made sure that a woman with exactly the right combination of assets and vulnerabilities would be available just when you needed a new mark?" I had no idea if any of that was true, but the beauty of paranoia is that it doesn't require truth, it just requires plausibility. And from the expressions on their faces, what I was suggesting was entirely plausible. If you're watching this and you've ever had to choose between certain death and a desperate gamble that might save your life, comment below and tell me what you chose. Because what I did next, what I said to 4 armed criminals in a tunnel with federal agents closing in from both directions, determined whether I would live to see another day. I took a deep breath and delivered the final piece of my improvised deception. The reason you can't trust each other is that you were never supposed to trust each other. Your entire operation was designed to be discovered and destroyed, with all of you taking the fall for crimes committed by people you've never even met. The silence in the tunnel stretched for what felt like hours, broken only by the distant sound of federal agents moving through the passage behind us and the closer sound of 4 criminals breathing heavily as they processed what I'd just told them. Finally, the leader spoke. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard."
Is it?
"When did you last have direct contact with whoever runs Meridian Acquisition Services? When did you last speak to anyone above you in the organization who wasn't communicating through encrypted messages and anonymous phone calls?" I could see the wheels turning in their minds. In sophisticated criminal organizations, compartmentalization is standard practice. The people at the bottom never meet the people at the top. Communications are filtered through multiple layers, and operational details are shared on a need-to-know basis. "You're saying we're expendable," Matthew said slowly. "I'm saying you were always expendable. Think about the structure of your operation. Multiple identical men carrying out the same crimes in different locations, creating maximum exposure and maximum evidence. If someone wanted to build a case against organized marriage fraud and human trafficking, what better way to do it than to let you operate for years while documenting everything you did?" Marcus lowered his weapon slightly. "But the profits, the money we've been sending up the chain, was probably a fraction of what you actually generated. Most of it has been going into federal evidence accounts for years, building the financial case against the real criminals while you thought you were getting rich. It was pure improvisation, but it was based on what I'd learned about the psychology of criminal organizations. The people who do the actual work are rarely the people who reap the actual benefits, and they're almost never the people with enough power to protect themselves when law enforcement pressure increases." "The voices are getting closer," the 4th brother said, glancing back toward the tunnel entrance. "Then we better move," the leader replied, but the certainty had gone out of his voice. We continued through the tunnel, but now the dynamic had changed completely. Instead of 4 partners united in criminal enterprise, I was surrounded by 4 men who were beginning to realize they might have been pawns in someone else's game all along. "Even if what you're saying is true," Marcus said as we walked, "even if we've been set up from the beginning, it doesn't change our current situation. We're still facing federal charges for everything we've done." "Unless you cooperate," I said. "Unless you help the FBI take down the people who were really running this operation. And you think they'll just let us walk away in exchange for testimony? I think you'll have a better chance of surviving in federal prison than you will if you keep running. Because the people who set you up, the people who've been using you as expendable assets, aren't going to want you talking to federal investigators." We reached the end of the tunnel, where a ladder led up to what looked like a storm drain cover. The sound of running water was much louder now, and I could see moonlight filtering down through the metal grating above us. The leader climbed the ladder first, pushing the cover aside and scanning the area above ground. After a moment, he gestured for the rest of us to follow. We emerged into a drainage canal about half a mile from my house, surrounded by thick woods that would provide cover for anyone trying to evade law enforcement. It was the perfect escape route, except for one problem: it wasn't empty. Federal agents were positioned along both sides of the canal, their weapons trained on the tunnel exit, their tactical lights creating a circle of bright illumination that made hiding impossible.
FBI.
Drop your weapons and put your hands where we can see them. The four brothers looked around at the ring of agents surrounding them, and I could see the moment when they realized their situation was hopeless. They could surrender and face federal prosecution, or they could fight and face certain death. "This is Agent Sarah Chen," a familiar voice called out through a megaphone. "Rebecca, if you can hear me, we need you to move away from the suspects." Sarah was alive. Whatever had happened to Lisa, whatever intelligence these men thought they had about FBI operations, it had been incomplete. The investigation was still intact, and the trap we'd planned had worked exactly as intended. I started walking toward the federal agents, but Matthew grabbed my arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said, pressing his gun against my ribs. "You're our ticket out of here." "Matthew, look around you. There are 20 federal agents with rifles pointed at your head. I'm not your ticket to anywhere except federal prison." But desperation makes people stupid, and Matthew was desperate enough to think that a hostage might somehow improve his hopeless situation. "We want safe passage out of the area," he called out to the agents. "We have a hostage, and we will kill her if you try to stop us." "Matthew Patterson," Sarah's voice came through the megaphone, calm and professional. "This is Agent Sarah Chen. We've been monitoring your organization for 18 months. We know about the quadruplet operation, we know about Meridian Acquisition Services, and we know about the 23 women whose lives you've systematically destroyed. This ends tonight." "You don't know anything," Matthew shouted back, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "We know that your real name is Matthew David Patterson, born in Bakersfield, California, on March 15, 1985. We know that you and your three identical brothers, Marcus, Michael, and Mitchell, have been operating under the direction of Meridian Acquisition Services for the past 12 years. We know about the safe houses in Phoenix, Chicago, Denver, and Miami. We know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And we know about the 8 women who died rather than continue living as victims of your operation." 8 women. The number hit me like a physical blow. Lisa had mentioned some women who'd committed suicide or died in suspicious accidents, but hearing the official count made the scope of the evil we were dealing with crushingly real. "Most importantly," Sarah continued, "we know that Rebecca Patterson has been working with federal investigators as a confidential informant for the past 14 months. I stared toward the sound of her voice, shocked. That wasn't true. I'd only learned about the criminal operation a week ago. But then I realized what Sarah was doing. She was providing official cover for all the intelligence I'd supposedly provided to the criminals, making my improvised psychological warfare seem like part of a long-term federal operation. "That's impossible," Marcus said, but he was looking at me with a mixture of betrayal and grudging respect. "Rebecca approached the FBI in August of last year, when she first began suspecting that her marriage was not what it appeared to be. Over the past 14 months, she has provided detailed intelligence about your operations, your methods, your victims, and your organizational structure. Everything you believed about her, everything you thought you knew about your operational security, has been compromised from the beginning." It was a masterful piece of psychological operations. By claiming that I'd been an informant all along, Sarah was accomplishing several things at once. She was explaining how federal agents had gathered so much intelligence about the operation. She was protecting me from retribution by making it clear that I was under official protection, and she was sowing even deeper paranoia among the 4 brothers. "You bitch," Matthew hissed, tightening his grip on my arm. "You've been playing us this entire time." "I've been trying to survive," I replied. "Just like the 23 other women you've victimized over the years." "Rebecca," Sarah's voice continued through the megaphone, "we need you to move away from the suspects so we can take them into custody safely." "I can't. Matthew has a gun." "Matthew, you need to understand that your situation is hopeless. You're surrounded by federal agents, you have no escape routes, and continuing to resist will only result in additional charges being filed against you. Release the hostage and surrender peacefully." Instead of surrendering, Matthew pressed the gun harder against my ribs. "We're walking out of here, and if anyone tries to stop us, she dies." But as he spoke, I noticed something that gave me hope. His 3 brothers were slowly backing away from him, distancing themselves from what they clearly saw as a suicide mission. Whatever loyalty had held them together as a criminal team, it wasn't strong enough to survive the collapse of their operation. "Matthew," Marcus said quietly, "let her go. It's over." "Shut up. This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so careless with the Charlotte situation, none of this would have happened." "My fault? You're the one who got sloppy with the identity work. You're the one who let her sister spot us on that flight." Even facing federal arrest, they couldn't stop blaming each other for the failure of their criminal enterprise. The psychological warfare I'd started in the tunnel had completely destroyed whatever trust had existed between them. "All of you, shut up," the leader, who I now realized must be Mitchell, said. "We need to focus on getting out of this alive." "There is no getting out of this alive if we keep Matthew's plan," the fourth brother, Michael, said. "Taking a hostage just guarantees they'll shoot us." "Then what do you suggest?" Michael dropped his weapon and raised his hands above his head. "I suggest we surrender before this gets any worse." "Michael, what are you doing?" Matthew demanded. "I'm not dying tonight because you're too stupid to recognize when we've been beaten." Michael walked slowly toward the federal agents, his hands visible, his movements careful and non-threatening. Within moments, he was on the ground with agents securing him in handcuffs. "Smart choice," Sarah's voice said through the megaphone. "Anyone else ready to make the same smart choice?" Marcus looked at Matthew, at the gun pressed against my side, at the ring of federal agents surrounding us. Then he too dropped his weapon and raised his hands. "I'm done," he said simply. As agents moved to arrest Marcus, I found myself alone with Matthew and Mitchell, two desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. "This isn't over," Matthew said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Look around you, Matthew. Your operation is finished, your brothers have surrendered, and you're facing life in federal prison. The only question now is whether you're going to add murder to the list of charges against you." "Maybe I should. Maybe killing you would be worth it just to make sure you can't testify against us." But before he could act on that threat, Mitchell made his choice. He grabbed Matthew's gun arm and twisted it away from my body, shouting to the federal agents as he did so, "Take the shot! Take the shot now!" I threw myself to the ground as gunfire erupted around me, the tactical team moving with swift precision to neutralize the threat Matthew posed. When the shooting stopped, Matthew was on the ground, wounded but alive, and I was surrounded by federal agents who were finally taking these criminals into custody. "Rebecca, are you hurt?" Sarah Chen knelt beside me, her face filled with concern. "I'm okay," I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. "Is it really over?" "The arrests are over. The prosecutions will take months, maybe years. But the immediate danger to you is finished." I looked around at the scene, for identical criminals in federal custody, a drainage canal full of law enforcement officers, the end of an operation that had destroyed dozens of lives over more than a decade. What about the other victims? The women who are still trapped in this system? "We'll find them. With the intelligence we've gathered and the cooperation we expect to get from at least some of the suspects, we'll be able to identify and rescue every woman who's currently being victimized." Sarah helped me to my feet, and as I stood up, I realized that something fundamental had changed inside me. For the first time in over a week, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused about what was real and what was deception. I wasn't questioning my own perceptions or wondering if I could trust my own judgment. I was angry. Furiously, righteously angry at what had been done to me and to 23 other women whose only crime had been trusting someone they loved. "Sarah," I said, "I want to testify. At every trial, every hearing, every proceeding. I want to make sure that everyone understands exactly what these men did and exactly what it cost their victims." "Are you sure?" "Testifying will mean reliving all of this, probably multiple times." "I'm sure. Because if there's anyone watching this who's going through something similar, anyone who's discovered that their entire life has been built on lies, anyone who's wondering if they have the strength to fight back against people who seem more powerful than they are, I want them to know that justice is possible." 6 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom and watched as Marcus Patterson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for his crimes. Matthew received the same sentence. Michael and Mitchell, who had cooperated with federal investigators, received 25 years each. More importantly, the investigation they had helped with led to the identification and rescue of 19 women who were still trapped in various stages of the criminal operation. The network of safe houses was dismantled, the offshore accounts were seized, and the leaders of Meridian Acquisition Services were arrested in a coordinated international operation. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a letter from a woman named Jennifer in Seattle, who had seen my story on the news and realized that her own husband was part of a similar operation. Because of what I'd shared about my experience, she was able to gather evidence and contact federal investigators before her situation became as dangerous as mine had been. That letter made me understand that my revenge hadn't just been about punishing the men who'd hurt me, it had been about preventing them from hurting anyone else. Today, I live in a different house, in a different state, with a different last name. I've rebuilt my graphic design business from scratch, and I've learned to trust my own judgment again. It took months of therapy to process the psychological damage that 8 years of systematic deception had caused, but I'm stronger now than I was before any of this happened. Not because I survived something terrible, but because I chose to fight back against it. If you've watched this entire story, if you've stayed with me through all 10 chapters of the most terrifying and transformative experience of my life, please take a moment to share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when they needed it most. And most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your life, if someone's behavior doesn't make sense, if you're being told not to question things that seem questionable, please don't ignore those feelings. I learned that love without trust is just a beautiful lie, and that the people who demand blind faith are usually the ones least deserving of it. My name is Rebecca. I'm watching from my new home in Colorado, and I survived a criminal conspiracy designed to destroy my life by refusing to be destroyed. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about making sure the truth becomes impossible to ignore. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear.